All right, so I'm going to be talking about soft proofing. And let me just get things on my screen adjusted. Okay, so what is soft proofing? So soft proofing is using software to emulate what a print of your image that you have edited or you've taken in your camera and perhaps edited in Photoshop or whatever. So you use software to simulate what a print of that image is going to look like. It is a fact that prints do not exactly match what you see on your monitor. And so soft proofing is a way that you can modify that print to better match what is on your monitor. There are a few prerequisites for soft proofing. Namely, you have to have a profile for the printer and paper combination that you're going to be using, and I'll explain what this means. In addition, your monitor should be calibrated to a reference print, and I'll explain that. And you don't have to soft proof. I mean, I choose to soft proof. I found it to work out well for me, but there are other ways to get your prints to better match what you see on the screen. Alternative is hard proofing, where you actually make test prints, and I'll explain that in a second.
Okay. Wait, Jeff, you all we see is your screen. You
don't see my.
I don't.
No.
No one else sees it.
Yeah, it says soft proofing.
Yeah. Jeff, what we're seeing is your.
No, we're only seeing where you keep the files.
Yeah,
okay, let's try it again.
Oh, he has a PowerPoint presentation.
I think we should say hello to Betty while we're waiting.
Hi there, guys.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, now you can see it now?
Yeah, now.
Yes. Okay, there you go.
Thanks, Annie.
Sorry, I knew something was missing, but I didn't know.
Okay, this was the first slide in case you missed that.
We did.
Okay, I'll be sending these to Diane so she can post them on the website.
Right.
Oh, great, thank you.
Okay, so the first prerequisite was you need to have a printer and paper profile. And so what is this? Well, if you buy a printer for printing photos, so for example, I have a Canon Pro 100, Canon provides with the printer what are called profiles to match each of the Canon papers that Canon produces.
Right.
So this is a representation of how the colors and the brightness are going to show up on that combination of printer with its ink and the paper that you're using. And you'll get a different profile for every paper that you use. Okay, if you choose to use someone else's papers, you don't like Canon papers, maybe you want to use Red River or some other manufacturer, those manufacturers as well will produce profiles for various different printers and their papers. They and the printer manufacturers' profiles are, you would say, generic profiles. They're created averaging over many different printers and instances of the paper. So they won't be necessarily perfect if your particular printer is a little bit different than the average, but they're usually very good. And that's what I've been doing, and it works well. So I use those profiles. Now, maybe you don't have a printer of your own, and so you're going to send your print out to be created at a lab like White House Custom Color, MPix, whatever. Those labs often will have profiles for you to download, which you can use for your soft proofing. And so you just need to go onto the lab website, usually somewhere squirreled away under a section called Color Management. They'll have those profiles. You download and then you'll make use of those. If you want to get fancier than generic profiles, you can have custom profiles. And there are service companies that you can find that for $25 or $30 will create a custom profile. So what you do is download an image or some software, you make a print of it on the paper and your printer, and then you mail that in to them and they will scan it and send you a file via email that will be your printer profile. So you can do it that way, or if you do a lot of printing with lots of different papers, maybe the more cost-effective way would be to buy your own device for making profiles yourself. And for example, X-Rite is a company that makes monitor profiler devices. They also make print profile devices. Their cheapest one that does both printing and monitor profiling is the i1 Studio. Costs almost $500 unless you get it on sale. And you can create your own profiles that way. But as I said, I've been using the generic profiles that I get from Canon for the Canon papers, and I've been very happy with those. So that'd be the place to start if you have your own printer.
I would also mention, if I can, Jeff,
Sure.
that Canon I've found to be extremely helpful when you call them. So literally, they answer, you're speaking to them in English. They're based here, I think, in Virginia. And they're so helpful, from everything from Canon cameras to the printers to the paper profiles, whatever. They've been really supportive.
And some of the other companies, like Red River is a company that makes various kinds of paper. They've got a really great website with all sorts of useful information in addition to profiles. They have a chart that they keep where they estimate how much ink it costs on various different printers to make various size prints. So if you're shopping around thinking about buying a printer and you want to know how much is it going to cost me to make prints using ink on an Epson versus a Canon versus a HP, they have tables of that. So there are all sorts of interesting references online.
Yeah, I wasn't pitching Canon, by the way, sorry.
No problem. Okay.
Would that Canon printer work with a Sony camera?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It works with anything. Now, the printer I have called the Pro 100, they have discontinued it and they've replaced it with a newer printer called the Pro 200. The big disadvantage to the Pro 200 is it costs a lot more. You were able to get the Pro 100 for really cheap at times. The Pro 200 is going to cost you $500 or $600. So unfortunately, printing has gone up in price since they discontinued the Pro 100. Now, I had mentioned two prerequisites. One was the printer plus paper profile. The other is the monitor calibration. And so you need to calibrate your monitor so that you know that what you're seeing on your screen is an accurate representation of your image. And if you're going to make prints, the way you should be calibrating your monitor is to a reference print. So at the bottom of this slide, I give you a URL to go find a reference print, and you see a picture of it on the right-hand side of the slide. And that's just a test print that has been carefully produced to know that all of the values and all of the pixels are correct. It will produce an image that's not too bright, not too dark, not too contrasty. All of the images are in that test print are correct. And so what you need to do is take that test image and print it out on your printer, or if you're using White House Custom Color or another lab, have them print it out for you. And then what you're going to do is view that print under a reference light. Now in the bottom right-hand side of the slide, you see your monitor on the right-hand side of the picture, and to the left, there is this viewing booth with a light shining on a print. And that's the fancy way of viewing prints. You have this calibrated light box, which has a light of a particular brightness and color that is set to an industry standard, and you can calibrate according to that. I don't get that fancy. I have just a simple light. It's called an OTT light you can get these for $30 on Amazon or at Joann's Fabrics. A lot of people who sew use these lights because it has a nice daylight balanced light. And I use that as my reference for viewing the print. And the reason I have a reference print is because your print will look lighter or darker depending on how much light you're shining on it. So if you don't have some prescribed reference way of looking at your prints, you're gonna get prints that are brighter and darker just depending on how you think they're going to be brighter or darker, just depending on how you're viewing them. And so I use a reference light. You look at the print under the reference light, and then when you calibrate your monitor, you adjust the brightness so that the brightness on the monitor matches the brightness that you see on the physical print under your reference light. In addition, you adjust the color temperature of your monitor so that the color tint of the print that you see under your reference light matches the view that you see on your monitor. And if you don't do it this way, you're, not likely to get prints that are going to match really closely to the monitor. And so if anyone has had me come over to their house using the club monitor calibration tool, this is what we've done. We've always taken one of the test reference images that I have printed out from White House Custom Color, and we view it under an alt light, and we compare it to their monitor, and we adjust the brightness accordingly. All
Jeff,
right.
are you going to discuss inks in your presentation?
No, I will not.
Okay, well, I made the mistake of buying an off-brand ink for my Canon Pro 100, and it clogged it up, sure enough. And going back to your price point issue, it would have cost me as much to replace the inks from Canon as getting a new Pro 100 with a full set of inks. I think I paid about $125 when they had it on special, and I'm guessing if they've discontinued it, they may have a lot of specials now. So
They have
anyone-
no specials. You can't find it anywhere.
Oh, okay. This was
Yeah.
last year when it happened.
And when you paid $120, Art, even though you considered that on special, you were paying a lot, because I got mine for $69,
Woo!
and then I bought a second one because I was able to get it for $59, and I only bought it because I got free inks with it and
Both of-
paper.
Oh my
And it was
goodness.
cheaper to buy the printer and throw it away than it was to buy more ink. That's the kind of sales they had on these things.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
definitely cheaper than buying aftermarket ink, which is another pitch for buying your own printer's
Yeah.
ink. But anyway,
Okay, so the alternative to doing soft proofing is what is called hard proofing. Namely, what you do is you make a test print of your image and you look at it and you decide, what do I like about this? What do I not like about this? Maybe it's not quite as bright as the image you see on your screen. So you say, okay, I've got to make it brighter. Maybe the contrast isn't quite as good. So you say, I should add some more contrast to it. Or maybe a particular color doesn't look quite right. You should say, I should adjust that color. So hard proofing is the tried and true method of doing test prints. It's an iterative process though, and it can be quite time consuming. So there have been software techniques that have been developed to make this a little bit faster. One technique I show you on the right-hand side of this slide, where what you do is you make an adjustment to your print in something like Photoshop. This in fact shows Photoshop. So you create, say, a levels adjustment layer. And on the mask for that levels adjustment layer, you put in a stepwise varying of the mask so that you get on the left-hand side of the print 100% of the levels adjustment. Next to that, you get a strip, which is 80%, then a strip that's 60, 40, 20, and 0. And so you see that mask under the finger there that's got these various different shades of gray. And what that causes is when you print this out, you'll have your image adjusted, the brightness adjusted in varying levels from 100% down to 0. You take a look at your test print and you decide which strip matches my print the best. And you line that up with your mask and say, ah, that's the 60% strip. So what I'll do is I'll make this same levels adjustment, but I'll fill my mask completely with 60% gray and then make a print based on that. And I'll get a print that matches what's on my screen. There are some printer manufacturers, and in fact, Canon is one of them, provides software that comes along with the printer. And that software can do this test strip print for you. And I show that on the bottom left-hand part of the slide, where they give you the ability to adjust the brightness, the contrast, the color tint, and you get a big set of different swatches from your print, varying the color tint and the contrast and the brightness. And you look at those different swatches and you find the one that matches up to your print the best. And then you tell the software, use those adjustments for when you make your print, and your print will then match your screen. And so this is the way of doing it. I know one of our people on the chat today, Paul, likes to do this kind of hard proofing. And so if you have any comments, Paul, feel free to chime in.
Well, what I do is somewhat in between all of these. The advantage of what I do is not only can I decide on the print itself what total adjustments I want to make, but it also gives me an ability to say, oh, I think this area needs to be a little brighter or darker or whatever. So in Lightroom, I have the original. Then I basically do a copy that is a half of a stop or two brighter. I do another copy that's a stop or two darker. And then I do another copy that's, say, has a significant increase in contrast. So now I have 4 prints. And what I do is I just have some 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that I'll get close enough. Because again, one of my advantages is I'm mostly colorblind. So it's really easy for me to be satisfied. So what I will do is I'll print all 4 of those on that sheet of paper. And then when I look at it, I take the original and say, oh, I think I want this X amount brighter or darker. I want it X amount more or less contrast. And then I will pick areas of the image where I want them adjusted a little bit based upon those other 3 examples. And when I'm done, I delete the other 3 copies. And now I have the final print that I want to make.
Paul, do you use, when you say you do a couple stops one way or the other, are you using exposure or are you also using levels like Jeff?
I simply, in Lightroom, I simply change the exposure. So I make it brighter, I make it darker, and I make it more contrasty.
You do it in
I
Lightroom.
could do other ways, right? I could make other things where I add more of this color or that, and that would be a disaster if I did that.
Yeah, for those of you that don't suffer from the issue that Paul and I have, intensity and exposure probably are more important to us than the exact right color, which we won't see anyway. At least that works for me, Paul. I don't know.
Okay, so that's hard proofing. That's one way to do it. But let me tell you now the details about doing soft proofing. And I'm going to describe this as is done in Lightroom because Lightroom does soft proofing right. It makes it the easiest for you to do it. You can do it in other software. On One has an ability to do soft proofing. You can do soft proofing in full Photoshop. Don't know if you can do it in Photoshop Elements, but definitely you can in Photoshop. However, they don't give you all the tools that Lightroom does. And so we'll talk about it here in Lightroom. So how do you go about doing this in Lightroom? You start in the develop module. I'm going to assume that you've got your image either out of the camera and then adjusted however you want in Lightroom. And this is your final master image that you have edited. And so in the develop module, you'll find on the bottom left-hand portion of the screen under the image, there is a little tick box that is normally unticked called soft proofing. What you do is you just click on that to tick it, and that enables the soft proofing mode in Lightroom. And when you do that, a new little section will open up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, just below the histogram, which is called the Create Proof Copy. And in there, you will see it's got an entry for the profile that you want to use. It will have something called the rendering intent, and I'll explain this. And then it's got a checkbox called Simulate Print and Ink, which you definitely want to check. You want Lightroom to try to simulate the color of your paper and the darkness of your black ink, because it'll give you a more accurate representation. So what do these little options allow you to do? The first is you need to choose the profile you're going to use for your paper. So I said one of the prerequisites is you need a profile. So Lightroom will provide a drop down. It's got those arrows to the right of the profile. And if you click on those, you will see a list of all the profiles that Lightroom knows about. At the beginning, Lightroom may not know about your various different profiles that you have loaded onto your computer. If it doesn't, you select the other option, and it will open up a window that shows you every profile that your computer knows about. And what you need to do is put a check mark next to the profiles that you want to have available to you in Lightroom. So in this example, I'm clicking on the profiles for the Canon Pro 100 printer that I care about. And those tend to be the profiles that have the 1/2 in front of them and not the profiles that have the 2/3. The 1/2 means the higher resolution, finer version of the profile versus the lower resolution. So that's why I've only checked those. So what you'll do is you'll select the profile for the particular printer or paper that you're using. And if it's someone else's profile, like White House Custom Color, you'll have downloaded that and you do a check mark to say that you want to have that available in Lightroom, and you select that profile. Next, you're going to have to choose what's called a rendering intent. And what this is about is it deals with the fact that the range of colors that your monitor can represent is going to be different than the range of colors that your printer ink and paper can represent. And so this tells the software Lightroom what it should do to deal with the fact that there may be colors that the printer can print that Lightroom can't represent, or that Lightroom can represent that the printer can't print. How should it deal with them? And there's two different ways that are, have been developed to make adjustments to your image. And they're called perceptual and relative. In perceptual, any colors that are out of gamut, namely that are represented on the screen but can't be printed by the printer, Lightroom will move those to a nearby color that can be printed by the printer. So for example, you may have a very intense red that the printer can't quite print. So Lightroom will change it to a slightly different shade of red that the printer can print. And then what perceptual will do will take into account the fact that certain colors have been moved, and any nearby colors that, even though the printer can represent them, it will move them as well. This will allow any nice, smooth gradients in color in your print to be represented with smooth gradients of color in the ultimate print that is made. Now, an alternative to the perceptual rendering intent is the relative colorimetric. In this case, only the colors that are out of gamut are changed to other colors that are in gamut. The ones that the printer can print, the software will just leave alone. And so your choice is you choose between these two different rendering intents. And when you click on one of them in Lightroom, the soft proof that you see on your screen will change according to how Lightroom is varying this rendering intent. And what you need to do is choose the rendering intent that you think is the best starting point for doing your soft proofing, namely, which one is a better representation of your image. And that's completely up to you. So you make the choice, and over time, what you may find is that you'll choose perceptual, you'll do the rest of your soft proofing, and maybe at the end you might decide that, I don't think I really like this, and you can go back to the beginning, try it again with relative, and do that. And over time, you'll figure out which of these two, perceptual or a relative, works better for which type of print, or which type of images. And then you'll end up choosing that. It'd be an easier choice for you. But at the beginning, choose one of them and go on from there.
Jeff, in setting up your camera, I understand the most common form, at least for monitors and so on, is sRGB. What do you shoot in typically?
So your camera has a choice that you can make. It says, do you want to represent images as sRGB or Adobe RGB?
Yeah.
And what that applies to are the images that get processed on your camera, namely the JPEG images.
Okay.
If you're shooting RAW, then it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
So what's going to happen is the color space that is used is the color space that gets used by whatever processing software you're using. With Lightroom, it uses a color space called ProPhoto RGB, which is a bigger color space than either Adobe RGB or sRGB. So I just use that. Okay.
Okay.
What I don't know, I've varied over time with my camera, since the setting in your camera only applies to JPEG images. I, at the beginning, set my camera for sRGB because I figured if I'm ever creating JPEG images on my camera, I probably want to share those JPEG images right away. And if I'm going to share them, the web and anyone else that is going to use those images probably expects them to be in sRGB. So I tend to set the camera for sRGB just because if I ever produce that JPEG image and it needs to be shared, that's going to be the right choice.
Okay, so you have a full set of choices if you're in RAW, though.
In RAW, yeah, you have the full set of choices that whatever software you're using allows you. So
Okay.
Photoshop would allow you to use ProPhoto RGB, Adobe RGB, sRGB, and there are even some others. So with Photoshop, you can choose a whole slew of them. With Lightroom, you get ProPhoto RGB, and then it's only on export that you maybe want to convert it to sRGB if you're producing a JPEG that you want to share with the Camera Club or other people.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so you make your choice of the profile you want to use and the rendering intent, and now it's up to you to make edits to your image to make it look more like, to make the simulated print image look like the image you had, your master image in Lightroom. And so what I typically find is that prints always come out slightly darker than the image that I have on my screen. So the first adjustment I make is to brighten up the image by, I don't know, 4/10 or 5/10 of a stop. So I go into Lightroom and I grab the exposure slider and I move it, say, half a stop. And as soon as I let it go, Lightroom pops up this window you see in the middle of the screen that says, create virtual copy for soft proofing. And the answer to that is yes, you want to make a virtual copy. So you've got your master image, and if we don't make a virtual copy, what we're going to end up doing with this soft proofing is editing our master image. We do not want to do that. Instead, we create a virtual copy and we make some edits to the virtual copy, and we are going to then print that virtual copy instead of our master file. The edits will correct the image so that it looks more like the master file. And when you select create proof copy, Lightroom will immediately create this proof copy, and you will now be working on the virtual copy. If you look down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the name of the virtual copy. Conveniently, Lightroom chooses the name of the virtual copy to have the name of your profile. So it's got Canon Pro 100, and then it has a comma and it says relative. So it includes both the profile and the rendering intent in the name of the profile. That's great because I might want to make different prints on different papers. And so I'll have a different profile for each different printer, each different paper that I use. And so it will give me a separate different virtual copy for it. My master file will live there unchanged. I'll just have a different virtual copy for every different paper that I'm going to use and make a print out of. Okay, so once you've got your virtual copy, now it's up to you to edit that virtual copy to match your master file. And Lightroom gives you a tool where you can do a two-up view of your master copy, your master file, and your virtual copy. So you can start making adjustments to your virtual copy. So as I said, I like to brighten it up a little bit to match the master copy. I like to change the contrast. Normally your print will not have quite as much contrast as your screen does. So I add some contrast. I might want to adjust the colors a little bit. And this two-up view will give you a way of saying, okay, I'll make this adjustment. And then I look at what the master file looks like. And I look back to my edited virtual copy, and I decide, have I made those correct? And the way you do this two-up view is shown in the bottom left-hand part of the screen where I've circled. Lightroom has this option where it shows you two Ys, that is left and right view of your image. And you can choose from that drop-down menu what gets shown on the left-hand side. What you want for that is it to be the master photo, and then the right-hand side will be your virtual copy. So you now have a left-right view to make your edits. Okay, and you go and you make your edits. As I said, I typically adjust exposure, contrast. I might play with the shadows and the highlights. If you want, you can make local adjustments using an adjustment brush to say that, I think this little section needs to be a little bit brighter or have a little more contrast, like Paul was talking about with his hard proofing. Okay, you might want to go into the color section, HSL color section, and you can take the targeted adjustment tool from that and say, you know, this particular shade of red in my master copy does not quite match my proof copy. So I'll go over to my proof copy, use the target adjustment tool, select the saturation or the hue or the brightness, and I'll click on that red and I'll move the mouse up and down, and it will adjust the either saturation, the hue, or the lightness of that particular color, and you can match an individual color that way. You can do a better job than just looking at left and right images if you zoom in. So if you click on the image, you can zoom in, and then you can get a two-up view where you've seen it, see a zoomed in version of your image with the master on the left, the virtual soft proof on the right, and you can choose from, do you want a zoomed in top and bottom view or a left-right view? And you can even grab your image with the mouse and slide it left and right. And so if you're looking at the various different shades of blue in the sky, you can adjust it in your soft proof image on the right. You can grab the mouse, slide that left and right, and see as it goes between soft proof and master image, whether that hue or that shade of blue is the same. And if it's not, readjust it. If you get it the same, great. You've finished your editing. Okay. One thing that I'll warn you about is Lightroom has the ability to tell you what colors in your proof, your soft proof, are out of gamut for your printer. And you do that by selecting in the histogram this arrow at the upper right-hand corner of it. If you click on that, it will show you any colors in your image that are out of gamut by coloring them a bright red color. And if you look at the screen, the image in the screen, you'll see some of those. Some people, when they describe soft proofing, will say, you don't want these out of gamut colors. And what you need to do is adjust the hue, lower the saturation, do something to get rid of those out of gamut warnings. And I think their advice is just totally misguided. The software, through the rendering intent, is going to deal with the out of gamut colors, and it's going to choose colors that are a really good close representation of those out of gamut colors. If you have a few colors that are out of gamut, don't worry about it. Don't fret, just let the rendering intent deal with it. What you'll find is that the resulting print is going to look really good. It will have chosen very good representations of those out of gamut colors. So I'm just giving you a warning not to listen to people who advise you to fret about this, because it's not a big deal.
Jeff,
Okay.
another question, if it's not
Sure,
interrupting
go ahead.
too often. Going clear back to monitor calibration.
Yep,
I use a relatively inexpensive tool that I'm going to have to update, I guess, called Spider 5 Pro.
that's fine.
And I guess it has to be updated because it's still a 32-bit and has to be updated to a 64-bit, something like that.
No, Spider 5 Pro is going to produce reasonable profiles.
Okay, and what I
Yeah.
find interesting on this subject really is that it shows me, after I've calibrated my monitor and then I put something like this up, it shows me right there what's in and out of gamut.
Yep,
And I find that really helpful, especially as a person who is color challenged. So
okay, yeah.
that works well for me. One more question, and that's, I think I know the answer, but taking Paul's approach, if I want to see how it's going to print on
Excuse me,
semi-gloss.
excuse me. I don't want to be rude, but if you keep asking these questions, there won't be enough time for me to do my presentation. So
Okay.
I feel like we should deal with this kind of stuff in a printing. You know what I mean, Jeff and
Yep.
and Art?
That's fine. Keep
Okay,
going on,
sorry. I don't. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so let's now then finally get to the section of where you print it. Lightroom has a printing module, and what you need to do is print out your virtual soft proof. You're not going to print out your master file. You're going to take the edited image that you've done with the soft proofing, and that's going to be the image that you print out. Okay, so what you do is select that in the Lightroom printing module. You go down to the section where you're going to say where I'm printing it, and you choose the profile that you've chosen, the rendering intent that you used, and you print out that particular print. Okay, if you have your own printer. If you don't have a printer, you're going to need to print this out to either a JPEG file or a TIFF file. If you want to use a JPEG file, which is fine, you can use the printing module, and that's what I've done for all of my prints. If you want to use a TIFF, you're going to have to use the export section in Lightroom. And then you print that and send that file to the printing company that's going to do the printing. Okay, I will point out that for a lot of these questions that we have about monitor profiling, and I have done previous presentations in the past, and the slides from those presentations are available on our website. So go and check out the toolbox section of our website, and you can find those previous presentations and use those for more information on how to do printing and how to do profiling of monitors. So I'm going to now stop my share so we can turn it over to Annie because she's got some useful information to share as well.